let me go ahead and get some slides started, and I'll talk to those. And I'll get a copy of these slides out for your reference later. I need to reduce some of the images to make it transmittable through email, or I'll put it up on a share drive somewhere to get it transmitted. But anyway, so yeah, like Eduardo said, I'm Ron Da Silva. I am Vice President of Operations at Quantum Loophole, but I'm also here representing my consulting practice, Network Technologies Global, and more importantly, as a member of the numbering community, here to share some of what I've seen, heard, and learned over the years, and then provide an opportunity to talk about some current events. So numbers and things, that's what we're here to talk about. So first, I have to point out, today is Canadian Thanksgiving Day, I believe. I trust the Canadians here in our audience had a great weekend and an opportunity to celebrate, if not today, then over the last couple of days. And then, you know, it's also Columbus National Holiday here in the U.S., Columbus Day. So, you know, half the call is probably on vacation, but still here supporting the rest of the North Americans to support Noralo. And nevertheless, glad to be here. And what better excuse than to express appreciation than Canadian Thanksgiving Day? And first, my gratitude to Eduardo and Glenn for inviting me today, but then also Judith, a longstanding friendship, Rita, Jonathan, and Greg, all I think doing a fabulous job at steering the Noralo organization and the activities that we have underway. But more broadly, I also want to just provide some thanks to the Noralo and at large for accepting me into this part of the ICANN family a number of years ago. So what am I doing here, right? I started off in my career doing operations for service providers, and in that capacity, you can't run a service provider operation without having internet protocol addresses, IP addresses. So that's where my first connection with RIRs or IP addresses came into play, the need to really support my day job and be involved to make sure that there was adequate addresses available to assign to customers and to continue to grow the business. That's where my first introduction to the numbering community came. I showed up at an ARIN meeting, and I'm pretty sure it was my first ARIN meeting. I showed up and there was an election underway, and I put my name forward. Oops. Seem to have lost you guys. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
We hear you.
Hi, Ron. We hear you, but we don't see your screen share.
Yeah, I saw my presentation and slides just sort of disappeared already. So the audio kept going conveniently, but there's the slide. So I was starting to say, so my first ARIN meeting, I show up and it's an election. So one of the things that they have for governing address policy in the ARIN region is a small body of volunteers, 15 members, that shepherd the process through the community, identify what the issues are, help authors produce proposals, have those proposals vetted, and then eventually make recommendations to the board to adopt those policies. So I decided, hey, what better way to get involved than to jump in the deep end? Kind of like the way I get involved in a lot of things. I like to just jump right in. So I put my name forward and ran for one of those seats on that policy group, not really knowing what I was getting involved in, and quickly, gained a lot of appreciation and interest in what was happening in the ARIN region, and stayed there for 6 years. I chaired it for 5 of those, and then stepped down as my career kind of pivoted into another direction, more as a people leader than as a technician. So I stepped away from it a little bit, but then I came back when the board of ARIN asked me to step in and serve on one of the 3 seats to the ASO. That sounded interesting. I hadn't done that before, didn't know what ICANN was per se, so I figured, hey, this is what better way to jump in the deep end than to, yet again, just jump in and figure it out as I go. So I did that. I sat on the ASO for 5 years, and ASO, one of the things it does is it appoints a couple of board members to ICANN. While on the ASO, I began looking for, where are there interesting areas for me for the ICANN community related to my career and my profession and my employment. What things should I gravitate towards? So I found myself gravitating towards like the ISP constituency, the business constituency, and then naturally the at-large. A lot of the folks, especially here in Narano, I find in ISOC events, I find them in DC policy related stuff, and there's lots of great intersection in what's happening here in Naralo with my interest in career. So I came here and I really felt welcome when I showed up and started participating in Naralo activity. So and as you know, I then being appointed to the board for 6 years on behalf of the ASO, continued to expand and be involved in other parts of the community and policy work and the namespace, but still had my heart and interest and roots back in the numbering space. So that's my long journey to how I got here today in front of you and here to prepare to talk about numbers. So what the heck is an RIR anyway? A Regional Internet Registry. There are 5 of them, and some of this material, by the way, I've taken the liberties of reusing some material we have been creating and maintaining on the ICANN board. The ASO members, appointees, have kind of created and maintained this deck to help introduce new board members as they come on to what the numbering aspects are with regards to the internet space. So the RIRs, there are 5 of them, and each of them are basically operating a large database indicating what number resources belong to whom. And they all then facilitate all the policies and processes and meetings and everything else around establishing the governance of those resources. That is sort of like the highest level explanation I can provide. I think that's sufficient for now. Back in the day, so we talk about history. Back in '83 and many other RFCs, basically the text in the RFC would say, "Go see John if you need numbering resources." This dude's got them. And he kept like some sort of paper record who was assigned to which. And a number of folks throughout our community have original assignments that came from John Butzel. And then this sort of evolved, and there was a need to make it more robust and scalable. And there's in 1990 a significant piece of work that came out of the IB around distributing identifier assignment information, and then later in '92 guidelines for management of IP space. And I think one of the important things that came in the early '90s was the needs-based criteria, really focusing on let's make sure we don't much space to only assigning addresses to people that actually need them, either end users or service providers. So it's sort of an important piece that went into the early formation of policy around numbering resources. And that carried us through really the mid-90s. So you see this blue line at the bottom of this table. This is the central registry, or the internet that was hired to keep track of some of that in the later years. But then introduce in the formation of APNIC, ARIN, RIP. These labels are off. I apologize for that. And later LACNIC and APNIC. And you get the 5 registries now here today. And I think also interesting, just because we're here in an ICANN venue, ICANN established in '88, a bit after some of the first RIRs were established, and after some of this numbering resource database information was already established and being maintained by a number of these operators. So the birth of ICANN and later the definition of the ASO kind of followed sometime later. I always find that interesting and fascinating. So what is the NRO? This label that keeps getting thrown around, because the ASO is basically a construct in the bylaws of ICANN. It describes an address supporting organization, an organization that provides support for addressing related information into the ICANN ecosphere, along with GNSO, at large, everybody else, right? And, but the NRO, I mean, really, if you think about it, the ICANN and the ASO functions showed up after the RIRs. The RIRs got together and thought, hey, this is a good thing. We should be involved. We should come together and find a way to meet this desire to have address and ASO, an address supporting organization, in the mix of ICANN community. And the vehicle that they used to do that is they loosely came together in an unincorporated way and agreed that the 5 RIRs would create this thing called the Number Resource Organization. And it's just a unincorporated association of the 5 RIRs with an agreement that with all 5 of them working together, that they would fulfill what's defined in the ICANN bylaws as the ASO. That's basically it. And then the NRO had to figure out how do they want to populate an address council, and then what role that address council has in serving what's defined in the ASO. Often this gets mixed up, NRO versus ASO, but it's basically just terminology for some of the same things. So what does the ASO do then? One of the key things, the composition has, besides the 5 executives from the IRs that come together and provide overall governance, there are 3 members appointed by each of the 5 registries to get a body of 15 AC members, what they call them, advisory council members. And these members, 2 from each region that are elected and 1 from each region that is selected typically by the board, are there on scattered terms, so they don't necessarily overlap. And they provide really 2 functions. One, to the extent that there's a global policy that's established, it's this body that looks at and ensures the process used by all 5 RIRs to come up with a common and uniform policy that's global in nature was in fact followed correctly in each of those 5 RIRs. So that's one function. And then in the event that happens, by the way, that's only happened 3 times. In the event that happens and the ASO signs off on it, they then turn around and point to the ICANN board and ask them as a uninterested third party to validate that the process. It gives a step of accountability, if you will, for the RIRs in their global policy development process, to have a third party then look at and ensure that all the processes are followed correctly and everything kind of works as prescribed, with the end result being a global policy that they all implement in a uniform way. So think of that. ASO helps coordinate global policies, but then secondly, I mentioned earlier, they also appoint 2 of the members of the ICANN board. That's about it. They have a lot of other things they do and focus because it's a collection of experts in the numbering space, but those are the 2 primary functions of the ASO. So moving on. So what does ICANN do? Well, the biggest thing that ICANN does in the numbering space is they hold sort of the central registry of what IPv4 addresses, what AS numbers, and what IPv6 addresses belong to. Broadly speaking, which registry? There are some legacy registrations in IANA, but at a high level, IANA has, this /8 belongs to, right? This /8 belongs to ARIN, this /8 belongs to AFRINIC, etc. And then you go to each of the 5 registries to further identify which parts of that /8 belong to which ISP or which end user, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the function that IANA has with the numbering space for v4, v6, and on the system numbers. And then this global policy thing I described briefly got a nice graphic that we use all the time to represent this. You can see there's a lot of words in here, so I'll encourage you to go look at this later. But just this big round circles that are going left to right on the screen, really the left showing every regional registry has its own policy process where they go and they vet out within their community the policy, and assuming it comes out from all 5 in the same way, then in that sort of orange circle in the middle, that's where the Address Council then validates, yeah, these are all 5 correct. They pass it over to the ICANN board and ask them to validate those processes have been done. And if it is, then direct the IANA to implement if there's any implementation requirement on IANA. Otherwise, back to the RIRs for them to implement. That's high level the global process. So what kind of policies exist? I mean, it's evolved considerably over the last 20 years, from needs-based to not needs-based to the creation of the transfer market, from legacy space, definitions of different members who participate and have address information in there, whether it's V4 or V6 end users, local internet registries or national internet registries, all kinds of different words and languages, and the policies around how all these operate and ultimately obtain resources in order for them to continue their businesses. So I thought this would be a good chance to pause. We are, what, 20 more minutes of time, just to see if there are any questions on the numbering side before we jump into the APNIC in particular. Judith, to your hand.
Yes, it's Judith Helsing for the record. Yeah, so my question was, in that chart where you were saying that that's so you have the RIRs, then you have some larger companies that also have very large blocks. They get them from ICANN directly, or do they get them from the RIRs?
You're talking about this where, like, for example, General Electric is
General Electric level 3.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you look at the date, 1994, so this is a legacy assignment. So if you take, remember when I mentioned early on in the 90s, registrations were done by request to John Patel, and he would keep track of that. And then when all this was automated and put into the system, all that information was preserved. So they don't, today, a company can't go to IANA and say, hey, I want a big block of V4 or V6. They would go, instead, they would go to one of the regional registries and obtain resources from them.
Oh yeah, so they've been put in, I see the legacy. So they've been put in back into ARIN.
Yeah, well, it shows here that ARIN is, it's in the ARIN database for continue to maintain it. So all the information in IANA has to be assigned to one of the 5 databases. So you can see here, even though General Electric obtained this 3/8 back in 94, before all these registries existed, later it was, the registries worked out to figure out who should have which large legacy blocks in their databases and then continue to maintain that. Yeah, hope that helps. Any other questions?
Thanks so much.
Dave, that's you.
Hi, thank you for the record. Thanks for the opportunity to have the question, and thanks for the presentation so far, Ron. Well, the question I have is, it's a fairly generic question, and it tends to, it's a question that I tend to raise in my mind over multiple issues. And specifically, I have a technical background, so I'm aware of the nature of the numbering within the internet system. And a typical end user does not have that knowledge. How would you be able to relate, and this might be an impossible question to ask, but I'm going to ask anyway, how would you relate the work that you and the group of people that you're, the numbering people, how would you relate what you do to an end user that's using the internet? Or is that something that we may not be able to answer? Thanks.
No, I think it's an easy question, David, because being, an expert in the internet space, I think probably all of us get that same question in some form, which is how does it work or what is it? And specifically for numbering resources, I always find it's easy to use the analogy of the postal system. If you need an address that's unique and globally coordinated, so that if somebody sends you a check for your birthday, it shows up at your house inside the birthday card and not at somebody else's house with a birthday card. So the uniqueness of the addressing is really important. And that's basically what the purpose of coordination is to ensure every address is used conservatively, and also, in other words, not wasted, and also that it's unique on a global scale. Does that help, David?
Absolutely. Thank you. It never hurts. The postal system is a great analogy that any end user would understand, and perfect, bang on. Thanks.
No, I don't see any other questions. Oh,
Yep. Yeah, I do have a question. I know, I don't know if you mentioned autonomous numbers that are used for the networks itself. Who assigned those? At the RIRs or IANA? I don't know.
Well, I suspect there were some originally assigned, just like there were with the original numberings before the RIRs exist. But then once the RIRs were there, they are like any of the IPv4 or IPv6 resources managed in large blocks by each of the RIRs, and then from there they assign them out to end users or ISPs within their service area.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And in case anybody doesn't know what Eduardo's asking about, ASNs or autonomous system numbers, it's basically a label to describe a network. Excuse me. So, for example, we saw GE was on that IANA slide. You thought GE had all their resources assigned out of that 3/8, a label of an AS number, call it, number 25 or number 4671 or whatever, some label that's assigned to it is a way to describe, here are GE's networks. They have 3/8, maybe they have some other addresses as well, and it can all be aggregated and then assigned this label to provide sort of an aggregate view of all of GE's resources. That's the purpose of an autonomous system number. And actually, it's funny that you asked, that you brought things up, because thinking real time, Facebook had this huge outage, and it turns out, the protocol that's used to communicate between networks, between one autonomous system and another autonomous system, and exchange information about what addresses belong to which networks, called the Border Gateway Protocol, BGP. That, in fact, was what triggered, from my understanding, is what triggered the outage for Facebook the other day. That was pretty significant in the news. They had some changes that were made, and they went through some routes, and reachability went away for DNS, and things were, couldn't find them anymore because DNS wasn't working. So yeah, those are autonomous system numbers are ASNs.
Thank you.
Okay, so the other half, I was asked to talk a little bit about Africa, and specifically APNIC, what's going on in APNIC. So thought this could be a little fun. APNIC is happening, but Africa in general is happening, but I hope everybody appreciates a lot of development, a lot of activity happening in the continent, and lots of opportunity and booming experiences happening in many of the economies in Africa. So it's really exciting. And being there early on, I was at one of the first meetings of APNIC that was in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And it was exciting to be there early on and see the formation of the organization, the challenge of early getting people to show up and participate, and it was exciting, and I was really proud to be there and to support the early beginnings of APNIC, and then just seeing what's been happening since then. That was it must be 15 years ago now, something like that. But to see what was happening then, and then just to see how the infrastructure and the internet in Africa is just thriving, and there's so much going on. I'm really excited about it, and I hope that you guys share that excitement. But along the way, a lot of crazy stuff that happens not only in the internet at large, but specifically in APNIC, and a lot of this has hit the press, and I can speak a little bit to some of it based on what I've read, and it's kind of funny being asked to talk on this from a North American perspective, and then seeing Glenn, you've done some phenomenal reporting on your own. I've watched it kind of come out over the last couple of weeks and thinking, hey, should you be reporting on this instead? But yeah, here I am, and hopefully this will be a bit of a discussion rather than a presentation. But I thought I'd nail a few interesting milestones in here. I think I saw Adiel join the call. He was the first CEO of APNIC and stepped down back in 2014, and later went on to join ICANN, where he's there today. And then Alan Barrett followed him and stayed on through 2019. He's more recently been appointed to the ICANN board on the numbering community. So it's fun to see, some, as is true with a lot of, I think, what's going on in the sector, there's a lot of movement from, one role to another as people kind of follow their careers in the internet sector. So that's good. But there's been a few things that have popped up that have raised concern, like in 2018, there was issue with regards to sexual harassment claim coming up from a staffer towards one of the board members. There was in 2019 estimated $50 million worth of IP addresses that were inappropriately obtained and benefited from by someone senior in the staff. But then new CEO brought in, Eddie, came on in 2019, and he's really trying to take and focus on some cleanup for the organization and ensuring the resources are there for the years to come for the whole community in Africa. And then the latest that has caught a lot of attention is this dispute that is happening regarding an individual who obtained over a number of years a pretty significant amount of numbering resources out of the APNIC registry. My understanding is initially those are being used for some VPN access, but then later have been reallocated for leasing to markets outside of APNIC. And the policies in APNIC are, I think, a little different than what you see in some of the other regions where the transfer market isn't as rich, and there's still a need to preserve need-based criteria, so that the very small amount of addresses that APNIC has in the first place compared to the rest of the world aren't unnecessarily used up, and then thereby disenfranchising the internet community in Africa. So I understand the concerns and the challenges, but I think the biggest thing that comes out of that dispute that I think is important for us to see, even here in North America, is the proceedings going through the Mercer's court. One of the things the court did is it seized the assets of the APNIC operation, which made it difficult for them to maintain financial solvency. And ICANN's come in and helped out. I know ARIN's come in and helped out. I believe the other RIRs have helped out. So there's an effort here, and everybody has the same desire to continue to maintain and support this global coordination across the globe in spite of a legal dispute going on underway. But I think the big issue that comes to mind when I see this is just I'm not sure if the same sort of dispute happening in another jurisdiction would have had the same sort of heavy impact by the courts. Just recognizing the need to continue to run and operate the infrastructure as a national security issue or a regional security issue or an internet infrastructure need more broadly for the globe. The fact that all their accounts are frozen is extremely problematic in my mind, and I think about that going right against the need for a secure and stable internet across the globe. That notwithstanding, whatever needs to be worked out through the court, but I feel that particular decision by the court early on was pretty strong and disproportionate. But that's my own personal opinion. So yeah, what does that mean to us? Again, written right into ICANN's mission, ensuring the stable and secure operation of internet unique identifier systems. So this is important, and we have a little bit of time left. I figured we just open up for questions and discussion. Some of it I might have an answer to, but some of it I may not. question. Eduardo?
I do have a question about, and this is not necessarily for AFRINIC, but you know, these addresses are IPv4. They are now like a commodity that people buy and sell, and I'm wondering if one of the problems, you know, that it comes, you know, a specific RIR gets a block of IPv4s for the region. But what I read is that there are even other RIs that sell IPv4s outside the region. What can you comment on that, specifically mostly in ARIN, if that happens to as part of their policy?
Yeah, I think it's probably important first to state there are no more IPv4 addresses. I mean, the amount that is still being held by any of the registries is pretty de minimis. So the only available IPv4 addresses in any large scale are those that are already assigned to somebody else. And it's also important, I think, to note the industry and its policy process has decided a number of years ago to depart from, I mean, a couple of key things from a policy standpoint. There isn't such a strong adherence to needs. I think you have to define needs to get a transfer, or at least be able to keep the transfer before you can get more addresses, and that kind of varies by region. But generally speaking, need could be I'm running a leasing operation, or you know, I want to sell these, and I need more inventory. And again, that depends on which region you're in and how that's treated. And then it could also be selling them from one region to another. That happens all the time. There are transfer policies to allow the transfer of numbers from one region to another, so that if you buy a company that has addresses that say Belgium, excuse me, but you're a US-based operator, you can transfer the space from RIC into ARIN in order to maintain, you know, a common registry for your numbering resources, and then those assets would come over just like any other assets that are purchased from the company. If it's a software company, you get all the software. If it's a hardware company, you got all this capital that you pick up. And IP numbering just becomes yet another piece of asset. But you know, a bit of a departure from, it's interesting because I remember early on, you know, pretty strong discussions about not giving out addresses unless you can obviously show that you need them for yourself, or that you have customers downstream that you need them to be able to assign to. Yeah, there's a scarcity created value. Value now means that the addresses have monetary worth, and now that the market has decided to allow for transfers, then lots of transactions are happening. People are making money by taking those limited resources and selling them around the world for gain.
So this is Eduardo again, just following up. So
Pause there. Any other questions? David?
Hi, David Mackey for the record. Just another very high-level generic question for you. What do you think the top 3 upcoming issues that you have to address in the numbering space area? Just very generic. Just curious. What do you think the top 3 would be in the future?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, it's a good question, David. I think at sort of just at a global scale, obviously the biggest thing is still IPv6 adoption. A lot of operators are dual stack. What does that mean? They're running both IPv4 and IPv6 simultaneously. But if you think of the distribution of all the locations on the internet, there's a gigantic tail, and there still remains to be a very, very long tail of locations that are only accessible by IPv4. This I think is and continues to be, you know, the biggest challenge, transitioning from IPv4 to IPv6. There's been technologies offered to help bridge that. You know, the whole transfer market has helped bridge that, moving space from those that have it to those that don't and need it for a fee. The network address translation stuff means, you know, being able to use smaller number of addresses and reuse them for, you know, different users in the end, get more yield, more utility for a smaller number of addresses. So these kind of things that help stretch it. But ultimately, we got to get a transition over to V6 that covers the rest of that tail, whether it's some clever technology that we haven't stumbled upon yet, or just really strong advocacy to get it transitioned over. I don't know. I think there's still a little bit of squibbling over what should be done with the remaining V4 addresses. How many can you get? What are the caps? How do you deal with waiting lists? What happens when addresses are returned? And then just who's allowed to sell to whom for what price, whatever. I mean, just all the dynamics around fighting over the last bit of V4. I mean, it still happens. It's still significant, and you can see definitely disputes in Africa being demonstrative of the challenges with this. So I think that'll continue to kind of move things around a bit. But grand scheme of things, it's I don't know, I've heard people say it's, pushing the deck chairs around on the Titanic. But, we got to get past it. And a third option, I don't know, probably one more at a higher level. Okay, well, if V4 is pretty much done and V6 is big enough in space that end users can get such a large block that they'll never have to go back to a registry again, then what's left to fight about? Why have policy? What policy issues need to be resolved? How do you ensure continued, ongoing, stable, and unique operation of the numbering resources, and yet have people potentially, withdrawing because they're like, why bother? I got my big chunk of V6. I don't need anything anymore. I think that's another dynamic at play. Not having fresh workforce coming into the industry, having folks that have been in the industry for a while kind of moving out of the industry and creating a bit of a vacuum, and lack of interest because there's not that much going on. That could be a risk. I could see that happening in the coming years. So hope that's useful, David.
Oh, no, that's excellent. Really, really perfect. Absolutely perfect. Thank you.
Got me just talking off the top of my head. So.
Well, I'm just going to add, it's something that I just wanted to say, Ron, it's something that I don't usually come across this type of discussion. I'm aware of it theoretically, and I don't get a chance to talk to someone who is in the thick of it and has been in the thick of it for a number of years. So there's sort of a general understanding. You can use the post office, to an end user, but there are practical things that need to be done that do affect end users. And you perfectly, just thank you. This is really, and thank you, Eduardo, for again bringing in a number of people that are relevant to end users that we don't normally get to talk to. So thanks.
Yeah, well, these organizations are very important to the ecosystem, and they can have directly or indirectly affect the end users. So, but they're important, and people should know about them. And I think Ron gave an excellent presentation on, put it in the right perspective. And these are not organizations that people talk about them all the time. I mean, they're there, they do their work, but very rarely you hear about them. Are there any?
Eduardo, can I take?
Yes, go ahead.
Can I take 30 seconds just to?
Sure.
Glenn asked early on what's going on in PPML, the public policy mailing list. It's a mailing list in the ARIN region that's used to discuss policy work. Excuse me, within ARIN. There's been a lot of discussion, in particular because Dan Alexander from Comcast and I have both put our names forward to exercise the petition process to be added to the Board of Trustees ballot. They are undergoing an election. There are 2 seats that are up every year. Every year there's basically 6 members of the Board of Trustees of ARIN. 2 seats are up every year for a 3-year term. So there are 2 seats that are up. One has an incumbent standing, the other, the standing board chair is stepping down and leaving the board. There's an open seat for his. Anyway, so there's a process by which the ballot is populated. First is through a nominating committee, and a lot of people raised questions at the final results of the nominating committee's recommendation, which only included three candidates, where they, that's sort of the minimum, where they have the ability to put up to 6 candidates on the ballot. A lot of people are questioning why would they limit the membership's ability to choose, and in fact be, kind of like pre-choosing for the membership. So that's a lot of the debate that's going on right now on the PPML, and that's kind of instigated by the fact that Dan and I have both filed the petition process in order to be added to the ballot separate from the nominating committee. It's a little bit different than what happens in ICANN. The decision is still made by the membership. The nominating committee makes an initial slate, and then there's an option for the membership itself to anybody within the membership to be able to petition and get added to it. And this is actually the first time that that's been exercised for the Board of Trustees. It has been used successfully in the past to get onto the numbering council, or the advisory council, but it hasn't been used yet for the Board of Trustees. So I'm hopeful for success there. Certainly, if any of you are members of ARIN and have a login, would appreciate you just going in and click on the vote now to support the petition process. Shameless plug there. Thanks. Eduardo, back to you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here and give us this very good presentation. And